Не укрепи! Гигантские солнца мужественного сопротивления враги! Ангела света позри! Врагов же страшно и ужасно! Спина чужие, погоняющие сердце их наслаждающее! Дерзновение...
So the brutal and slow grind for the very important, and as I've said in my last two videos, perhaps the most important town and battle of this year continues in Avdiivka, in the Donetsk region. And Western media continues to give a one-sided and exaggerated account suggesting unsustainable casualties for the Russians, with the impression that Ukraine is winning the battle and inflicting massive losses on the Russians for little territory gain.
Hey, Brick Joe! You're going nowhere!
Take for instance this article from Forbes magazine, published 2 days ago, which starts off with an assessment from the Estonian Defense Ministry, which says that Ukraine can ensure Russia's defeat by 2025 by killing or maiming 100,000 Russians in 2024. It goes on to say that Ukrainians have been killing a lot of Russians already, citing mythical best estimates to be 315,000 Russian casualties, or 172,000 per year so far.
Jake here. This is crazy. According to US intelligence, the number of Russian casualties in Ukraine is now over 315,000. The latest casualty assessment marks a big leap from that provided in July of 2022, when CIA Director Bill Burns said US intelligence estimated that Russian losses were in the vicinity of 15,000 killed and maybe 3 times that wounded.
The logic being that if this rate continues, Russia only has the capacity to train about 130,000 troops every 6 months. Now, in a previous video I published several months ago, I entitled it Propaganda by Projection, and you should check it out after this video, the link in the top left hand corner. I said that the West and Ukraine looks for any and everything that's wrong with the Ukrainian army and falsely attribute it to the Russian army. And I made the case that all the claims of poorly trained and under-equipped Russians were really the truth for the Ukrainian armed forces.
Вот человек приехал, подожди, фонарик надо выключить, чтобы он захуярил где-то, блядь. Где он? Сверху, снизу. Ладно, сука. Так, сделаем. Ну, короче, вот, посмотри на камеру. Это человек приехал, блядь, на квадрике ездил на ИВАК.
Пизда нахуй.
Ну это в натуре, сука, пиздец, нахуй. Это, сука, это пиздец.
So I say the same thing is happening here. In my previous video, I spoke about a leaked report in a German newspaper claiming to know Russia's war plan until 2026, which involved taking more territory. And one of the key assumptions the Russians had was that they can kill about 100,000 Ukrainians per year for their demilitarization aim. So now Ukraine, who by the way has only killed 40,000 Russians in 2 years according to BBC Russian service, that was when they had their best and most equipped army, now expects to more than double that number per year as US aid dries up.
There is no magic pot of money that we can draw from. The assistance, the support that we have designated for Ukraine, that is running out, it's running down. We are nearly out of money that we need, and we're nearly out of time.
So the Western claim is that Ukraine has killed 13,000 Russians around Avdiivka in just 2 months, and that the infamous 47th Mechanized Brigade, which I made a video about and which has been heavily battered in the heralded Ukrainian summer offensive.
Украина.
Yes, That brigade is supposedly leading the way in attritting Russians with their, and I quote, fast-firing 25mm autocannon and squashing panicked Russian troops in their basement hideouts. Forbes magazine claims that Ukraine has knocked out no fewer than 211 Russian vehicles, which they say led the Russians to switch tactics and started attacking with infantry instead, straight out of Ukraine's playbook when the summer offensive failed. So you see the analogy they're trying to make here. But at the same time, the Newsweek reported also 2 days ago that according to the ISW update, there were confirmed advances of Russian units northeast of Kupiansk, north of Bakhmut, and you guessed it, southwest of Avdiivka. Newsweek reports that Russian forces are advancing around the flanks of Avdiivka and made a small gain on December 18th north of Puvo-Mayorsky, which is a settlement about 6 miles southwest of Avdiivka. On the 19th, geolocated footage shows that Russians made another small advance in the quarry area southwest of Avdiivka. The article states that a Russian capture of Avdiivka would open up a route to Kramatorsk, and that losing the city would also be a significant political blow to Zelensky.
No! God, please, no!
SW, however, cited Rybar reports of tactical Russian successes southwest of Avdiivka, claiming that Russian units are trying to push Ukrainian forces out of defensive positions in the Avdiivka coke and chemical plant. The current estimate is that Russia has around 40,000 troops concentrated on Avdiivka, and the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition.
Largest defense spender in Europe has considered raiding museums for scraps of usable equipment. When it comes to heavy artillery, Russia blows through France's entire arsenal every month. At least Germany is prepared to do battle, as long as the war doesn't last longer than a 3-day weekend.
Emotional damage!
Ivan Smaga, deputy commander of the 25th Ukrainian Storm Battalion, which is protecting Avdiivka, said that since the end of summer, the amount of ammunition reaching his unit was a lot less. Although he said he has enough to defend the attack, if the Russians continue, we will need more.
Get up, Hound!
I can't go on.
Look, you gotta keep fighting!
Tank's empty, bro.
And therein lies the point. All this Western hype about Russian casualties is not only overhyped, but utterly premature. Polish reporters seem to have a far better grasp of the Russian strategy around Avdiivka. Published on the 21st of December, this Polish article reveals that the main Russian attack on Avdiivka has not yet even started.
No, I'm just getting warmed up.
US Admiral John Kirby warned that the Russians are waiting for deep winter to attack Avdiivka on a large scale. Thus, the current actions by the Russians are merely in an attempt to surround the city on its flanks. Admiral Kirby believed that the closer to the end of January, the Russians will be able to increase maneuverability, and stated quite ominously that time therefore does not play in Ukrainians' favor.
There actually are and continue to intend to want to conduct offensive operations, particularly in the east around this place called Avdiivka. And we have every reason to believe, that as the ground freezes towards the end of January and into February, that will make it easier for Russian forces to go on the move.
This assessment was echoed by Alexander Borodai, a member of the Russian State Duma, who is also the head of the Donbass Volunteer Division, in an interview published in this article. He said that the current situation on the battlefield is a slow grind which invokes a lot of fights and losses, but that in a number of regions the Russians have progressed by 1,000, 1,200 and 1,500 meters and continued to pierce enemy defenses. He described it as not being a classic offensive where artillery and aviation destroy the enemy on the front line, as such offensive does not exist anywhere, unfortunately. However, he says they can feel the morale and technical decline of the Ukrainian enemy, and that it is understood that the Ukrainians are saving artillery shells and compensate for the lack of artillery by using FPV drones, of which the Ukrainian armed forces have in abundance.
Says officials believe that without more US aid, Ukraine would first run out of long-range missiles. Air defense missiles would be next, followed by artillery shells and short-range missiles, such as shoulder-fired Javelin anti-tank missiles.
In another interview with Vasily Kashin, a candidate for political science and director of the Center of Comprehensive European and International Studies at the National Research University, makes the point that I hinted in my earlier video entitled "The War is Over," where I spoke about Zelensky's interference with military decisions in deciding to hold Bakhmut longer than he should. Mr. Kashin recalls that the rift between Zelensky and General Zelensky started in June of last year in the Battle of Severodonetsk in Luhansk Oblast, where General Zelensky wanted to withdraw troops from unfavorable positions, but Zelensky insisted on fighting to the end. Currently, he says, Zelensky has his loyal generals like Alexander Seversky and those he doesn't like, such as General Zelensky. Zelensky tried to work directly with military commanders he sympathizes with, sometimes bypassing the commander-in-chief, which often harms the process of managing troops, and at some point, the US may have to intervene and resolve this conflict. Mr. Kashin states, in quotations, the intervention of Vladimir Zelensky and his entourage in military matters has always resulted in increased bloodshed and, above all, more casualties on the Ukrainian side, who has always suffered heavier losses than the Russian side. The Ukrainian president gave the order to hold the defense of fortress cities, even though the armed forces of Ukraine was encircled in a hopeless situation. And their lines of communication were under control of the Russian armed forces. Such was the situation in Bakhmut for many weeks. If Zelensky continues to interfere in military matters, the consequences will be twofold. First, it will accelerate Ukraine's ultimate defeat, and secondly, there will be many casualties that could be avoided.
Що вони запропонували мобілізувати додаткових 450-500 тисяч людей. Це дуже серйозна цифра. Я сказав, що мені потрібно більше аргументів для того, щоб підтримувати це.
Zelensky, he said, is a perfect example of a political leader trying to interfere in military matters. Lastly, on Avdiivka, Mr. Kashin stated that though Russia's initial attempts to take Avdiivka last year ended in failure, they are now seeing progress, and stated, surprisingly, that things are going faster than during the operation of Bakhmut. He noted, however, that Avdiivka is a much more challenging goal, but it is very important in terms of strategic positioning of the Russian forces. And politically, if Avdiivka is captured, he said, the internal situation in Ukraine and the morale of the Ukrainian troops will suffer a severe blow.
И вот все, что осталось от нашей группы. Очередной раз